Joining us this morning to share a few insights, we have Damion Crawford. He's the opposition spokesperson on education. Good morning, Mr. Crawford.
Fortis.
Morning, how is everything?
Fortis, so go on.
Fortis career said we're known for test.
You never had to do that. I heard you when you said you had no problem with the bill, but there were some stuff that you wanted to see added or taken out. I'm not certain. So what's good? And let's start with what's good about the bill.
Yeah, well, grammatically there's a correction. I have no problem with a bill, meaning that I'm not against regulation. But this approach is the bill. And therefore there are some concerns within the bill that I believe must be mitigated. For a effective bill to be in place.
All right, but just to get to what's good about what you've seen, and then let's talk about the concerns.
Well, a systematic regulation can always be beneficial in identifying the bad apples. It can always be beneficial in indicating the expectations, and it can always be beneficial in professionalizing a career, in making a person almost consider entry and not just see it as a kind of a moonlighting opportunity. So there can be systematic benefits by having regulation of this sort that is protective to the clients of that particular industry, which would be students in the main. So that is a benefit of a regulation system such as the Jamaica Teacher Council seeks to achieve.
Right.
But even with those systematic benefits, there can be individual risks that the individual must consider and seek to have mitigated moving forward. For example, it is reasonable that a person should be able to complain to this regulatory body, and that the person against whom the complaint is made should face this regulatory body. However, it is also a financial risk that that individual may have to hire a legal representative. We have seen with the police force that many are police that go before Indicom, even when they're found to be not guilty, still bear the punishment of paying their legal fees. And so therefore, it's reasonable to ask that a fund is in place so that the legal fees, especially for those found not to be in breach, is covered or remunerated to that individual. So that becomes a concern. It is also a concern that you have no right to face your accuser, which means you can question the credibility of the accusation, which means that there's an ease of making these accusations because there is no need for that person to be present in any way, therefore increasing the possibility of continuous malicious reports. Additionally, we are not against continuous professional development, but if it is inaccessible, there is an issue because you may be barred for not participating, and that inaccessibility can be, for example, the cost. So there is a current advertisement for professional development through the Early Childhood Commission. The cost is $20,000, and that is going to satisfy some of your hours. So if we extend that to mean it satisfies 1/5 of your hours, then we could see an expense of $100,000 that an individual have to commit to because they can't remain registered if they don't execute it. So it's reasonable to ask for these to be guaranteed, funded by the government, because there's a national benefit for which we're seeking to ascertain. There's a risk for a person like myself who's a volunteer, because volunteerism is defined in the bill as ad hoc. Now, I go every Saturday to teach maths at Charlemont High School for free, but it's not ad hoc. By extension, I need to know that I can just register online and that I don't need to pay a fee to volunteer. So these are problems within it that need to be corrected for a less hostile bill.
Yeah, when I hear you list such a lengthy set of concerns, the first thing that comes to mind is consultation. What was that process like leading up to the bill being tabled in terms of consultation, either with someone like yourself as opposition spokesperson and other stakeholders across the education sector?
Well, first of all, consultation is different from consideration. The fact that I speak to you is consulting. However, if I don't consider any of your input or sufficient numbers of your input or the most egregious components of your input, then I did not really consider. I can invite Neville to my house and ask him what he wants to eat. That is consultation. But if I make no consideration and only have pork, and as a Rasta, Neville don't want any pork, I don't project to be Rasta, then there was no consideration. There are still components of the JTA's submissions that have not been included in this particular bill. And there are considerations from private entities that have not been sufficiently included in this particular bill. So while there was seemingly extensive consultation, including the inclusion of a joint select committee for which the opposition would have had members on that joint select committee, not all these concerns have been represented in this actual bill that was presented. So the consultation must be separated from the consideration.
Yeah. Senator, let me give you some headlines and you could just give me a quick response. The objectives are to establish the JTC as a statutory body. Problem with that?
As a statutory body, no problem with that, no.
Regulate the entry. Problem with that?
In the method, yes. Not in the act of regulation, but why would I have to get a police record every 5 years when a person would have already accused me if I had to be accused, and that would be registered there? And I also believe 10 years is a reasonable. So how, yes, but not with the what.
All right. So conduct and professional development of teachers?
Again, no problem with regulating the conduct, but there should be a fund for persons to have legal representation so that they can have ample representation in front of the board.
Maintain registers of teachers?
No problem with maintaining registers of teacher, but it's creating flexibility when a person is registered only to teach physics and a principal therefore can't ask him to go and teach some mathematics because he would then be in breach of his registration.
Role of instructors and enforce standards of teacher competence and ethics?
No problem with having a role, but again, if you're going to mandate that I can't even teach online when I can't police international persons teaching online, then that is an overreach also into the home school system.
Promote teaching as a respected professional and accountable discipline aligned with Jamaica's education transformation agenda.
This doesn't satisfy that argument. Teaching is already perceived to be a professional and a revered profession within Jamaica. So that doesn't achieve that goal. That is just adding something to it. So
go back to what you said at the top. That, yeah, it's almost like you're moving in the right direction, but you're skipping some little things in between all of that.
Yeah, you as a coach know that if you do sufficient laps, you'll get fit. However, if you put it to where the person is in the harm or risk of injury, then that then becomes negative. So how is important as it relates to as the what as well.
Yeah. All that I have said just now, set in stone, and anything can be changed?
Of course, we're closer to having an effective JTC bill. However, it is just the mindset of hostility versus the mindset of facilitation. I believe that the majority of persons pushing the bill are of the opinion that teachers need to be curtailed in their power. And people argue, why is not like doctors and why is not like lawyers? Most of those persons operate in their profession in a private basis, not under government control and not under principal control. So I believe that we can get a more supportive bill that allows for more carrots than sticks.
How optimistic are you that your concerns, as you've aired them now and in other spaces, will be taken into consideration?
I'm very optimistic because it's time on God. I will soon be in a position where I am deciding on what will be in the amendment.
I like that answer. I like that answer. But overall, since you got into this job, I will put it there, there must have been an upward trajectory. I mean, yeah, I've been hearing that teachers need this, teachers need that, they're not getting this. Are things improving overall, though?
I don't believe so. I believe that
you don't believe so?
No, because the outcomes are not showing that, first of all. And I believe that the identification of the problems are limited. So therefore, we're running on the spot. Even this bill seems to suggest that the teachers are at the foundation of the issues that have caused for 18% of our children getting the necessary outcomes that we desire. However, there's going to be absenteeism. It's at 22%. That is now a celebration of pre-COVID levels. Chronic absenteeism is suggested to be 10%. So we're double what is chronic absenteeism. When it comes to nutrition, we still have 56% of our Jamaican citizens facing food insecurity. That has not been satisfactorily addressed in the school system, therefore leading to lethargy, iron deficiency, protein deficiency, and an incapacity to concentrate. When you talk about parenting, availability of parents, and capacity of parents, Jamaica have a 47% single-parent experience. The global average is 17%.
But
the
Damion,
Asian average is 4%. All of those impact education.
True.
We still have students going into CXC now that have not received their rental books. So that is availability and accessibility to the tools of knowledge. So, no, I don't believe that satisfactory movement has been made to improve our education system.
But Damion, a number of the things you mentioned just now aren't necessarily germane to education, but more around a cultural mindset as well. When you consider things such as the truancy, the absenteeism, the attitude of parents, etc., that's a broader national issue.
And that is the issue with how they're managing education, because they're ignoring these broader issues. But even when you come to the more micro issues, for example, because I disagree with your analysis, because an absent student impacts education directly. A malnourished student impact education directly. A student whose parent isn't involved impact education directly. But if you come to the realities of, for example, desk and chair availability, that is still limited. Books, still limited. Teacher migration, there's been no retention plan put forward to limit teacher migration, causing for some areas to not have teachers, such as mathematics and vocational subjects. There has still not been sufficient remedial effort to ensure that there's literacy. We have not reconsidered the structure of education to have an early primary that doesn't focus on being rounded, but focus on being literate. So I believe, again, that the approach needs to be more holistic, but even at the micro level, at the systems level, we have not had an increase in subvention to schools since 2016.
All right, Senator, always good to talk to you, sir. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much, man. Thanks for the opportunity, as usual.
Yeah, man, and you never said anything wrong when you said Neville and Rastafari. Actually, stay safe, Senator. Yep.
Good.
Opposition spokesperson on education, Damion Crawford. Would be also good to get the word from the other side.
Yeah.
I say opposition, and the Honourable Minister of Education would be good to hear or respond to the concerns of the senator. We'll go for a break.